Hi everyone, I'm Rincey and this is Rincey Reads. I'm back to do another reading update for everyone. But before I jump into it, I just want to mention that in case you missed it last week, I put up my individual review of Everyone Knows You Go Home. I talked about that book briefly in a wrap up earlier this month. Maybe. I'm pretty sure it was at the beginning of the month. And I said in that wrap up that I wanted to do an individual review of it, so I finally did, and it is up now in case you are interested in checking it out. I will link it up in the cards as usual. And then on Monday, I also put up another review of Black Girl Unlimited by Echo Brown. This is a mix of a memoir as well as just like a fictionalized coming of age story with a little bit of magic woven into all of it. I adored this book so much, which is the reason why I did an individual review of it. So again, that'll be linked up in the cards as well. If you are someone who enjoys young adult coming of age stories, highly recommend this one. It's beautiful and heartbreaking and really unique in my opinion, in terms of like the way that it decides to tell this story. So I definitely recommend it if any of those things ticks any of your boxes. All right, and now on to the books that I haven't talked about yet on my channel. So I also read A Burning by Megha Majumdar. This is a pretty new release. It just came out this month, I believe, and this is a debut novel. In this story, you're following three different perspectives. One of them is Jivan. She is this woman who has grown up basically in slums her entire life. She works as like a shopkeeper. Now, there's a terrorist attack that occurs at a train station like soon after she has like just left the train station, and she like writes a slightly flippant comment about the police on Facebook, and this ends up leading to her getting arrested for the terrorist act. They say that she's been talking on Facebook to someone who's a known terrorist recruiter, I suppose, but she says that she doesn't know like that this person was a terrorist recruiter. It was just someone that she was talking to on Facebook, but she ends up getting arrested for this event, and basically everyone thinks that she's guilty of it. The other storyline is this person named Lovely, who is a hijra, which is kind of like a trans person. Hijra is like this Indian word that kind of encompasses a larger segment of the population than just people who are trans women. Lovely is someone who's also poor, and there's like a whole culture around hijras and stuff like that. But Jivan was also teaching Lovely English, and so that is basically like her alibi as to how she couldn't have been at the trains when the bomb went off, because she was dropping off books for Lovely to be able to learn English. And then the third perspective is this man who's referred to as PT Sir, who is the gym teacher at this kind of middle class school where Jivan actually was a student. She was like a scholarship student basically. And so it's partially about like his connection to her, but also he ends up going to this sort of right-wing political rally at the beginning of the story and then kind of gets swept into the world of politics. So when I first heard about this book, when I was looking it up, the comparison or the comp basically said like for fans of Jhumpa Lahiri, Yeah Jessie, and Tommy Orange. And I was like, oh my gosh, yes, I love all of those authors with all of my heart. So this will definitely be a book for me. And while this isn't a bad book, I don't think this quite compares to those authors. This is a really compelling story. I think that the author does a really great job of creating these three very distinct, very compelling characters. The problem that I basically had is that all three of these characters feel very disconnected. They all have this sort of like loose connection to Jivan, but they don't really interact with each other at all, and you don't really see their stories cross into each other. Basically what this is sort of like a snapshot into Indian culture, which is very accurate from, you know, my sort of American view of what Indian culture is like, but it also feels very relevant to Western culture as well. Like I said, PT Sir gets caught up in this whole right-wing political world and ends up making choices in order to advance himself as opposed to doing things that are actually like truthful and correct. Lovely wants to become an actress, and so you're kind of following that, and you see the compromises that she's making in order to make those dreams come true. And then Jaivin's storyline basically almost entirely takes place in the jail, and she's trying to tell her story, but no one's really listening to her or telling her story honestly. So I feel like as separate stories, they're not bad by any means. Like I said, I found the story to be pretty compelling. The problem is that these just feel like three disparate stories, in my opinion. This is one of those things that I complain about all the time, but I kind of just wish it was from just any of these characters individually versus all three of them kind of packed into this story. This is also not a very long book. It's only about 300 pages. And the font in there is like massive, in my opinion, for a contemporary adult book. So I think that's also part of it. Like, it didn't feel like this story was fleshed out enough for at least my liking. And especially with the comparisons of like, yeah, Jessie and Tommy Orange and Jubilee Harry, who, in my opinion, create really deep stories. This didn't feel quite as deep. So I think I gave this a 3-star rating on Goodreads. It's probably more like a 3.5 star. This is definitely an author that I'll keep an eye out for, like for future books, because again, I think she has really great talent, but I think it definitely has a lot of that sort of debut-ness to it where it's not quite as deep as I wanted it to be. All right, next I listened to the audiobook of The Kill Club by Wendy Hurd. This is a pretty new mystery thriller book that came out. I think it came out in like December or January. I picked this one up for the Read or Dead podcast because we did an episode talking about LGBT plus books, either characters in those books that are LGBTQ or like the authors themselves consider themselves LGBTQ plus. And so there's a link to the podcast down in the description as always in case you're interested in hearing me talk about it in slightly more depth. But this was a really fun book. I enjoyed this a whole lot. You're following this character named Jazz, who is about 30 years old. She grew up in the foster system. She has a biological brother named Javier, who is only like 14 years old, and he is still living with their foster mother, Carol. Carol is like extremely fundamentalist religious. Jazz is a lesbian, and so obviously Carol and Jazz don't get along at all, but Carol is also so fundamentalist that she believes that God will cure Javier of the type 1 diabetes that he has and doesn't like give him his medicine consistently and tries to feed him things that he shouldn't be eating, etc., etc. And so Jazz, through a series of events, ends up getting invited into this thing that she dubs the Murder Club, where she will get assigned someone to kill, and then once that kill is done, someone will go and kill Carol for her. And obviously nothing is that easy or simple, but that's kind of how the whole story begins. And I'm just going to leave it at that because I went into the story basically just having that general synopsis in my head, but there's so much more that happens and there are so many twists and turns in this book that really took me by surprise. Some of the reveals I found to be a little bit predictable, or at least I saw them coming. I had inklings about them. Some of the reveals, especially the ones towards the end, really surprised me a whole lot. It was one of those audiobooks where when I was getting closer and closer to the end, I just wanted to keep listening because I just needed to know how it was going to turn out. Like, so much happens in this book. There's a lot of plot. And so I just couldn't see like where and how this was all going to end. So if you are looking for something fun, light, summery, like sort of plot heavy, vacation perfect sort of read, I highly recommend this one. It doesn't have a whole lot of ratings, so in my opinion it's like super underrated. I thought it was like really just like a fun plot driven story. It's not super deep, but again, like I said, if you are just looking for something fun and plot centric, I think that this will be a good one to pick up. All right, and the final book that I finished so far is These Ghosts Are Family by Macy Card. This is a book I picked up because June is Caribbean American month and a bunch of different people are doing sort of like read Caribbean, like read-alongs and things along those lines, and so I decided I wanted to at least pick up one book by a Caribbean author this month, and so this one was available at my library. So in this story, you are following this character whose name is Stanford Solomon, kind of. His actual name is Abel. I can't remember what his last name is. And when he was younger, he moved from his small town to Kingston, Jamaica, and then he moved from Kingston to London. And when he was in London, he was working alongside someone named Stanford Solomon when a freak accident occurs and Stanford Solomon ends up dying. However, everyone else on the ship when they find this body, they think that it's actually Abel who dies. And so they basically like tell Abel's family that Abel died, and Abel himself decides to take over Stanford Solomon's life. And so the story begins with Stanford Solomon, like in his 80s or 90s, deciding that he's now going to tell the truth and say that he's actually Abel and not Stanford. And then you basically like flash back in time and you see the life of other people in this family. So this story started off really strong for me, but by the end of it, it was just like a 3-star book. And I think it's, again, one of those situations where every chapter or section is following a different character. And one, it was really hard for me to keep track of who the character was and how they related to anything else. 2, it doesn't feel like the story ever wraps around fully. Like you start off in this place where this person's about to reveal the secrets about their past, and then you jump back and you see part of their life, and then you see part of Abel's wife's life, and then you see part of a daughter's life, and then a son, and then a different person, and it keeps getting farther and farther away from where it first started. And I didn't feel like it connected very well together. It also jumps around in time. I think that there are things in this story that are really strong, like the writing itself in terms of like the descriptions, talking about life in Jamaica, talking about slavery and the plantations there, which is something that I don't know a whole lot about, talking about trauma and like family history and all of that sort of stuff. But all of this just felt like short stories more than like a collected novel. And also the very end just felt really different from everything else in the book, and it didn't really leave me feeling very satisfied. So I gave this book a 3 out of 5 stars. Again, I don't think it's terrible, and a lot of other people are really loving this book, so I don't want to like dissuade people from picking it up if it sounds interesting to you. I just think it's like not my personal cup of tea, which happens. So that is everything that I have finished over the past like couple of weeks. I am currently listening to the audiobook of Ponte by Charlene Toe. I don't know how I feel about this book either, but I'm going to keep going because I just want to see how it turns out. I'm also still working my way through The Grapes of Wrath, as I've mentioned before. And then I've also finished Girl, Woman, Other for the BookTube Prize, and I need to pick up more of the books from the BookTube Prize. So those are all things that are kind of on my docket. So let me know down in the comments below what you've been reading lately, if you've been reading anything really good, or if you've read any of the books that I talked about here today. Feel free to leave comments about that down below. Or if you have any questions, you're always welcome to leave that down in the comment section as well. So yeah, that's all I have for now, and thanks for watching.